Alrighty everyone, welcome back to another little video, where today we're going to be doing something kind of fun. Today we are going to be looking at and talking about my new latest little project and my Dream X58 PC. Now I use air quotes around Dream because this PC is truly, in my opinion, a work of art, and really does go to show you just how nice it can be to work with something even on an older platform. Now, this PC has a lot of parts in it that someone may not recommend, but I did things for a reason in this thing, and the overall product, I think, turned out really, really well. So, let's roll some B-roll, and then let's talk about it, shall we?
Ice in my veins, I've been driving this train. Years in this lane, there's no stopping this flame. Cause I came to the game and I changed it to play how I like, rearranged it to my own domain. Yeah, I got what it takes, made lots of mistakes, taking shots, skipping breaks, feeling lost, feeling great, popping off, singing straight, never stopped, never changed. All the squad here to play, and I've got something to say, yeah. I work hard each and every day, I get lost in the words I say. I don't push pause, no, I push play. I won't stop till I make a change. I withdraw on the things I make. I turn flaws into flawless traits. I build tall, never capped in space. I won't stop till I hear him say, oh, oh, la, 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 la. And I'm up again. I got tired eyes, need a cup of blend. That's right, in the AM, that's my only friend. No light, just the sun coming up on the horizon. I lose track of time, yeah, I move fast and climb a new class divine, yeah, true passion shines. And I'm through passing time, I choose stacking dimes. You snooze half the time while I move passing by.
Okay, so this is, in my opinion, the best PC I've ever built, or one of the best looking PCs I have ever built. It is built in the inwin 301 PC case. It has an EVGA SLI micro motherboard, which actually has a very cool story behind it. It has a GTX 780 with a GTX Titan water block. Now this is just a reference 780 with a Titan water block on it, which does share the same PCB, so that's a nice little cool addition. I've got two 240mm full copper radiators being cooled by three Corsair maglev fans. I had to remember what they were called for a second. And then on the inside of the front-mounted radiator is two low-profile Arctic P12s, which are actually really good for as small as they are. Like, that one's surprising. For RAM, we are rocking 12 gigs of Corsair XMS3 Platinum, as I seem to always do. And for the CPU, now this is where things get a little bit interesting, because the CPU is actually a quad-core. Now this motherboard, like I said, has an interesting story behind it, but this motherboard is actually a version 1.0, meaning that the MSI, why do I keep saying MSI? Meaning that the EVGA micro motherboard version 1.0 means that I simply can't update the BIOS and drop in a Westmere processor. I would have to do the thing called the Westmere mod, which is actually what spurred on the video that I had made 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever I made that one. That video essentially was talking about my experiences learning about, like, why particular motherboards can't actually take Westmere Xeons. But that does not mean that I was left high and dry where I didn't have a CPU, because I was able to put in a W3570, which is 4 cores, 8 threads, fully unlocked. And I've got to say, it's actually kind of good. No, and I get it. Most people are probably sitting there thinking, oh, well, it's just a quad-core version of the 6 cores that we've always come to know and love. But the thing is, so often, people just constantly trash the quad cores and the first generations. because the first generation of CPUs actually came out in 2009, meaning that this is, what, like a 13-year-old architecture? Which is absolutely mental. But it doesn't change the fact that this thing actually overclocked surprisingly well for being a 45nm chip. And also, this whole system performed way better than expected. And we're going to get into some benchmarks here, and then we're going to actually talk about it. Because, yet again, this thing is kind of nutty. For the overclocks, I am actually running the RAM at XMP, which is 1600 CL9 at 1.65 volts. And for the CPU, I'm running it at 4.133 gigahertz at 1.32 volts, which for voltage is really low. But when we get into thermal testing, I'm going to actually show you guys why I stuck with that particular clock speed with that particular voltage. So let's get into some benchmarks, shall we? Okay, and for Cinebench R15, I scored a full-on score of 643, and that's pretty much what I constantly stayed at. This was a surprisingly good showing. At 643, we're just knocking on the door of the i7-3770, which is a non-overclocked CPU of 3rd generation, I know, but still, that's impressive, especially for Cinebench R15. Now, if we pull up Cinebench R20, I got a score of 1352 on the multi-core, and if we go over to single-core, I guess I did not run to that single-core, never mind. But as a multi-core score, that's really not terrible, honestly. Now, yeah, I know it could be a lot better if I was rocking a 6-core, but yet again, just for a quad-core chip, that's surprisingly good. And now let's head over to the gaming benchmarks, and the first game that I always have to test is Grim Dawn. So, my actual test methodology for Grim Dawn is always pretty much the same. Go in with one of my Necromancer characters, start spawning up a whole bunch of skeletons, and then run through Crucible. And throughout Crucible, we were maintaining pretty much a 60 FPS average. We saw a few drops here and there when there were large hordes spawning at the same time. But the game was incredibly smooth, incredibly playable. An experience that, honestly, I really had no issue with. I actually played for quite a while on this game. Moving over onto the next game, which was Skyrim. Now, this is the original version of Skyrim that is no longer available on Steam. But I did add in quite a few visual mods, and I played this at 1080p, ultra high detail settings, and we saw right around a 60 FPS average. This game, I know, is not exactly the hardest thing in the world to run, but it's an absolutely gorgeous game when you add some mods to it, and it ran like an absolute champ. The next game that I wanted to test was actually kind of an interesting one. That is Star Wars Empire at War, Forces of Corruption, Awakening of the Rebellion. That is an absolute mouthful, but I digress. This game is actually surprisingly CPU intensive. Now, Awakening of the Rebellion is a full remake mod for Empires at War, which is actually a wonderful game on Steam if you guys want to check it out, and it's actually only typically like 10 bucks. So definitely highly recommend go and check out. But this game is surprisingly CPU dependent, and I was seeing anywhere between 30 to 50 FPS in some of the bigger battles. When we would fast forward, it would drop down into the 20s, which is actually pretty normal for this game. And being one of the most performance-demanding mods on this game, I honestly really found no problem with this. I actually played through a good chunk of a campaign that I am still currently working on. So, yeah, I give this game an absolute pass. The next game that I tested was good old Destiny 2. Now, for Destiny 2, I just played some Crucible, and at Crucible, we stayed at a just about pretty much constant 60 FPS. This was at 1080p, I believe, medium settings? And yeah, Crucible, it ran perfectly fine, absolutely fine. I did try out the Trials of Eternity I believe is what it's called, the game mode. That is the most intensive game mode on the game, and we did see quite a few drops down into the 40s and 30s, but that is simply because of the amount of entities that are on screen at the same time. I don't know if that has to do with the X58 CPU, or if it has to do with the fact that the GTX 780 is not exactly a super hardcore gaming card nowadays, and Destiny 2 can be a little bit of a power hog. But I guess that's something I can test later in the future. For the next game that I played was good old Dota 2. Now, I had the frame rate locked at 120, and I played a solo bot match as Arc Warden. And the frame rate stayed anywhere between the 80s to the 90s, going up to about 110 FPS. It would have gone higher if I would have allowed the system to go higher, but I typically like keeping the 120 FPS limiter on, or else your GPU just kind of runs away with the game, and you could see frame rates up into like the 180s to 190s. But I prefer to play with a slightly lower frame rate, I know, funny enough, just so when you do end up getting bigger drops in the game, like when you're playing against a Darkseer, you don't end up having like your 200 FPS drop down to 90 FPS, and it causing the game to absolutely lag stutter. So, this game, yet again, is an absolutely perfectly competitive experience for playing Dota 2. One of the next games that I tested was XCOM 2. Now, I tried to play this with a whole bunch of mods installed, but unfortunately my mods were not cooperating with each other, so I was not able to actually test it with mods. But this is the original game with all of the expansions installed, and I was playing it at 1080p medium settings, and yet again, it ran perfectly fine. Yet again, 10 out of 10 when it comes to performance, and this is the kind of games that I play on a normal basis. And now, the final game that I played, or I guess the final game that I benchmarked, and that was Escape from Tarkov. So, Escape from Tarkov is kind of a mixed bag, but it would be kind of dishonest for me to say that it wasn't playable. Because when I started playing, or when I started benchmarking Escape from Tarkov on this computer, I was level 9. I am now level 14, by only playing Customs Raid. So, yeah, I think I've probably slammed another 10 to 15 hours on Tarkov on this computer. The game does not run the greatest, and unfortunately, I was not able to capture any... Actually, no, I'm going to try it again. You guys will see the footage if I actually was able to capture the footage, but for some odd reason, when I was trying to capture footage, it kept crashing my computer. But the game, it was having a hard time running the game, and especially when you're using a long-distance scope. But at the same time, I was able to grind, I think, for about 15 hours. Not straight, but I played this game for about 15 hours. And to say that the game was unplayable would be an absolute lie. The game is definitely playable. Not the greatest gaming experience I've ever had, but not bad, honestly. Like, meh. And also, I know for a fact, playing Customs, that map will take more than 16 gigs of RAM, so the 12 gigs of RAM is definitely holding it back, and that probably is what is factoring into a lot of the stuttering. But that is something I'm going to be testing later, as you guys might find out. Okay, but now that we're done with all the benchmarks, let's talk about the system, shall we? This thing is... I'm just going to put it bluntly, it punches way above its weight class. Everybody talks about how you always want to go for a Westmere Xeon or a 6-core because on the 32nm process, they shrunk the process node down so significantly that you can overclock it further. Well, my 45nm chip overclocks surprisingly well. And when it all is said and done, this thing is, yet again, surprisingly good. The system essentially has an i7 965 in it. Yeah, because then the, W3580 would be the i7 975. And running it at 4.1 gigahertz at 3.2 volts, surprisingly good. The only thing was kind of the thermals. So, under extreme load, the system would get to be about 50 degrees. Under extreme load, the GPU would hit about 45 degrees, which is perfect. And that's what I would be expected. But then the CPU was hitting about 65. And while that is by all means not overheating, this thing is under a custom water loop, and so this CPU should not be getting that hot. But it primarily has to do with the whole 45 nanometer process node thing, and pushing the voltage as far as what I did, as well as the fact that this thing is a little bit of a hotbox. Yes, this system does not have the greatest airflow characteristics in the world. To be expected, but that's okay, because yet again, nothing in my system is overheating. The hottest that I saw the Northbridge get was all the way up to 71 degrees, and that was the absolute hottest that the Northbridge got, which is still a Delta ambient, or that is still like, what is it, 30 degrees until you're starting to hit max temperature on the system. Now, I know I didn't test a lot of like brand new titles, but for a lot of what I play a lot of Tarkov, I play a lot of Empires at War, like a lot of Empires at War. Grim Dawn, Dota 2, a little bit of XCOM 2. Yeah, this system actually handled a lot of what I wanted it to do very, very well. And I really do like it. But there's just one little thing. I don't think I dream big enough. 980X, anybody? How about 24 gigs of RAM with LED heat sinks on them? What do you guys think? This could be fun. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.